In both the Premier League and the Dutch Eredivisie, there are two clubs, Tottenham Hotspur and Ajax. Both of these clubs have something in common. Despite being in different countries and playing in different colours, they both base their supporters' identity around Judaism and Israel. They have nicknames such as the Yids or the Super Jews. But why is this the case? Well, in today's video, let's find out. So both the capital of the Netherlands, Amsterdam, and the capital of the United Kingdom, London, from where these two teams respectively hail, have quite a long history of Jews and Jewish settlements, and are indeed the places in both respective countries with the largest number of Jews. Now, I made a video about this, the special relationship between Amsterdam and the Jewish population, even being called the Jerusalem of the West in the 17th century and afterwards. But London too has quite a long history. There were Jews in Roman Britain until their expulsion by Edward I in the 13th century. Then, in the middle of the 17th century, under the Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell, Jews were finally allowed to return to England, having been barred from entry until that time. And the first Jews to then settle back in England were in London, and they were actually from the Sephardic or Portuguese Jewish community from Amsterdam, after one of their rabbis had asked for special permission for them to return to England, which was then duly granted. And from this point, the Jewish community in London expanded, with several of those coming from Amsterdam. Later on, particularly in the second half of the 19th century, many Ashkenazim Jews would come from Eastern Europe following various pogroms and expulsions there. These were not always equally welcome during this period, including by some of the more original Portuguese Jews that had been living there, a similar pattern to what we saw in the Netherlands. But nevertheless, many of these Ashkenazim Jews arrived in particularly the East End of London, although as the decades went on, many of these would then migrate northwards, so that by the time when in 1882 Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was established in the North London Tottenham area, many Jews were living there and became supporters of the team. Secularization of the Jewish community played a large role, as it meant that on the Sabbath, on the Friday and the Saturday, which were no longer particularly religious days for many Jewish people, they could instead go to the football and have a bit of bother, as it was called. Now, the fan base of Tottenham Hotspur during these years, in around 1930, is estimated to have been around a third Jewish, which is a really high proportion for an English football team. Now, this led to many of the away fans that came down to London to watch a Tottenham game then calling out anti-Semitic and making fun of the fact that there were so many Jews among them, shouting things like Yids, Yids, which has been seen as a slur against Jewish people. Well, in response to this, many of the Tottenham fans began to chant it back, thus reclaiming this word that otherwise could have been very denigrating and making it their own. This has become one of the official and controversial, I should add, slogans and chants made by Tottenham fans. The story for AFC Ajax is a little bit different, but nonetheless rather interesting. Now, this club from Amsterdam had a stadium called De Meer, and in order to get to De Meer, or so the story goes, one has to go through the Transvaalbuurt and indeed the Jodenbuurt, which is the Jewish area in Amsterdam, and so many of the away fans going there felt that they were entering the Jewish part of the city and that therefore this must be the Jewish club of Amsterdam. In a similar fashion as what happened at the Tottenham Stadium, we see in De Meer also that rival fans would come and they would start chanting about the fact that they believed Ajax to be a Jewish club, and this would often lead to anti-Semitic chants as well, or simply chants of Yoda, Yoda, which means Jews, Jews. And once again, this was taken up by the Ajax fans as their own, who then began to chant it back. When exactly this first happened, though, is the point of some debate, although it certainly did lead to Ajax's nickname of the Super Jews, which was used quite frequently and continues to be used. This was somewhat strange, though, because in actuality in 1909 there was a strictly or a particularly Jewish club, a football team in Amsterdam that had come as a merger of several Jewish football teams called Wilhelmina Vooruit Hortus Eendracht doet winnen, with the very memorable acronym of VVHEDV. Try saying that one after a few pints. But this was the Jewish club of Amsterdam, and yet Ajax seems to have in some ways co-opted this Jewish imagery for themselves to use as their own slogans. And so we see a lot of imagery, the Star of David, the Israeli flag, being used, as well as music. We can see this particularly with the Hebrew folk song of Hava Nagila, which is then also being sung by Tottenham fans as well as Ajax fans. So there is a little bit of similarity between how these two sets of fans are using this symbolism, with both Israeli symbolism, Hebrew songs, and then Jewish symbols like the Star of David being used. But is there a connection between the two? Well, there might just be, because actually a lot of the very Jewish and Israeli symbolism found at Ajax games appears to have come in the 1980s, despite the fact that they were already known as Super Jews by this point and had the chant of Yoden Yoden, which had come slightly earlier. Now, the reason this began in the 1980s, an intensification of using these symbols, may actually have come from a game that they played at home against Tottenham, where the Tottenham fans that arrived in Amsterdam had actually inspired them to use these symbols. However, the Ajax club board was not always happy with this use, and so one of their representatives stated in 2005, "Our situation is a paradox. Everybody thinks we're a Jewish club, but in most of the cases, our real Jewish supporters are reluctant to attend our home games, let alone away games, because of the reactions it elicits. We have to find a solution for that problem." With the more intense adoption of Jewish symbolism came more intense anti-Semitic chants from other supporters. This included references to the Holocaust, the making of hissing sounds like gas, and other chants that were being aimed at Ajax fans and at just Jewish people in the area. A similar thing was found for Tottenham Hotspur, where there has also been a large debate recently about the use of the term Yid in particular, which is seen as a slur by many people, and indeed the use of other Jewish symbols. This is particularly the case because it's now estimated that Tottenham only have around 5% of their followers who are Jewish, which is about the same for the other clubs in North London, like their rivals Arsenal and Chelsea. So whether Tottenham can really still claim to be the Jewish club in London has been debated. Several organisations have come out against the use of this symbolism and the use of the word Yid, such as the World Jewish Congress and the Board of Deputies of British Jews, who both say that the club should cease doing this. However, the club's chairman, Daniel Levy, is of Jewish descent, and up until a few years ago, the owner of the club, Joe Lewis, was also Jewish, so there was still a bit more of a Jewish connection at the very top. Nevertheless, the club has gone after several of its supporters who were banned from the stadium for using the word Yid in a song. After much outcry and controversy, this decision was then overturned. They were recompensated for the games they had missed and allowed back into the stadium. It even prompted David Cameron, at the time Prime Minister, to intervene and draw a distinction between those rival fans using Yid as a slur to insult or in a hateful way, and those who were using the term in a way of admiration or self-identification, even if those people weren't Jewish. You can tell me in the comments what your thoughts on this matter are. Given the recent spate of violence once again in the Middle East, it'll be interesting to see whether these identities will survive the modern age of political correctness, and whether people who are not Jewish are able to use these words, even if in an admiring way or in a way of identification, or whether this is now deemed to be completely inappropriate. Once again, I'm not coming down on either side, but I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on the identification of Ajax and Tottenham Hotspur as being Jewish clubs, and whether this actually is or is not the case. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been interesting. Another random bit of football history that seemed quite current at the moment with what is happening, with a lot of interesting questions being asked exactly about what it is to be Jewish, what it is to be a football fan, political correctness coming into it as well, and how we deal with these former communities that used to be a lot more Jewish than they were today, particularly in the case of Tottenham Hotspur, and indeed in Amsterdam there were quite a lot of Jewish Ajax fans, even if they were never a substantial minority within that number. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. I have been Hilbert, and this has been The History.